Hi, I'm continuing in Singapore. Let's talk a bit more about finance cost reduction and finance departments, specifically focusing on data curation and data integration. One of the major costs of finance, as we noted in the last video or a couple videos ago, was the reconciliation process. And then we talked about how we've ended up with disparate data in the finance area. So the data curation process and data integration process is something that goes on all over. All of these spread out systems where instead of having something in a single spreadsheet that we could pivot, we're having to gather together the data that we've lost in the way that the systems worked thus far. If we change that, then we start to attack the data integration process. There's a graph that I've been thinking about recently that has the cost of computing and the cost of data integration. And over the years, the cost of our computing environments have been reducing dramatically. But the cost of our data integration work continues to climb. At some point, the x-axis on this is going to flip. The data integration work is going to be more expensive than the compute capacity needed for maintaining our data supply chains. That's the point at which it starts the reorganization of data, and the systems containing the data will be less expensive than continuing to do the data integration work. And I think we're nearing that, if we're not past that, for all the different cuts of data we have to produce and all of the different reports and use of that data. We're not getting as much out of our data as we should. So finance spends a great deal of time. There's a simple thing that I call running the computer system backwards. It describes what often happens. To understand a balance, you have to understand the transactions that made up that balance. So how do you do that? Well, in today's world, because the systems aggregate so quickly, someone has to typically go find the source data that was behind the aggregated number that got posted into the financial system. And once they put that into an Excel spreadsheet, then they start to guess at which rows can be added together to create the number that exists in the posted journal entry. And once they've tried various combinations of those, deleting rows, finding more data, deleting, then they finally match the number, then they have finally recreated the detail that gives them the transparency to understand what the number was and why it was, and they can finally start to do the analysis that is required. That same thing's done quite often when you need to integrate different data together to produce the output that's needed. So in many instances, some portion of the data is held in one environment and another portion of the data is held in a different environment, but the report has to combine them together. That's data integration work, and it's very expensive to do. That's not the only thing that's expensive. This data curation, like art curation, right? Curating artwork. It's a very manual process, and it requires a lot of thought processes, and it's highly personalized in many respects. That process is very expensive to go through in reporting processes and produce these unique reports and consistently have to reproduce them on a consistent basis every changing period. That process consumes a large amount of the finance budget. Changing those processes requires that we integrate our data more fully, and that's not a data warehousing approach. Integrating the data means lowering the level of detail in a data supply chain such that it supports multiple outputs off of the same data supply chain. That kind of integration work, along with enhancing the reporting application to give more flexibility to pivot that data and present that data in visual ways, in other ways, that starts to attack both sides of this data integration and the data curation process. If we don't do that work, we're not going to fundamentally change the cost of the finance budget around these processes. We've already done all the simple things there are to do. We have to attack the underlying data in order to attack the cost of finance in total.